In this video, we'll be introducing fractions. Let's start with some vocabulary. We typically represent a fraction as a over b, and we call a the numerator, and we call b the denominator. For the purposes of this video and the next couple videos that I'll have, a is always going to be a whole number. Whole numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And b, we're going to restrict to natural or counting numbers. These start with 1, so we're not going to worry about 0 in the denominator for the time being. Let's look at some examples of where children might have heard fractions before. We talk about half of an hour, 2/3 of a pizza, 3/4 of a foot. Notice that in each of these cases, we described a fraction of what? 3/4 of a foot, 2/3 of a pizza, 1/2 of an hour. We're going to refer to this part as our reference whole. What are we referencing? A fraction of what? So understanding the whole is really important in understanding fractions. Let's look at this in some more detail. So let's start with a reference whole of a square. I can then partition or divide my square up into 4 equal parts. If I shade in one of those parts, I'll call that 1/4 of my square. This means I have one part worth 1/4 of a square. If I shade in 2 parts, now I have 2 parts, and each of those parts is worth 1/4 of a square. So we call this 2/4, 2 parts each worth 1/4 of a square. Continuing on, I could shade in 3 parts. Now I have 3 parts, each worth 1/4 of a square. And so we'll call this 3/4. This is, of course, 3/4 of a square. I've stopped writing the reference whole. The reference whole is implied in this part. And finally, we have 4 parts, each worth 1/4 of a square. So we can call this 4/4, which is equivalent to just 1 square. Key in all of this was understanding the unit fraction. We kept going back to this 1/4. What was the value of one part? Unit fractions always have the number 1 in the numerator. They're very helpful in terms of understanding fractions that don't have 1 in the numerator. If we look at 3/4, we can think of this as 3 parts, each worth 1/4 of the whole. So the 3 in the numerator is the count, or the number, and the 4 in the denominator describes the partition of the whole. So the fraction is essentially shorthand, with the numerator telling us the number of parts and the denominator telling us the size of the parts or the name of the parts. In this case, our parts are 1/4 of the whole.